Hello, my dear students. I'm really happy to meet you after a long time. Okay, we are going to restart our course in grammar. Today we are going to take chapter 3 in this course relating to Quirk. In this chapter 3, we are going to talk about the verbs. Verbs from their types, classification, all discussions with examples. So the first section we are going to take that is 3.1, section 1, relating to the types of verbs. In this section, or in this chapter, we are going to classify the verbs according to two criteria. The first criteria, according to the function. We classify English verbs according to functions. The second criterion is according to the form. Form means the structure of the verb, while the function means the role that the verb plays in the sentence or in the clause. According to the function, verbs can be classified into two types. The first verb called the lexical, while the second group called the, let's say, auxiliary. See, the first group is the lexical verb, while the second one is the. Then we come to divide the lexical verb again in turn into two types. Either, as you know, either verbs can be, say, irregular or, say, regular. Regular, that verbs which take ed in the past and ed in the past participle. Irregular verbs, no, have, say, different forms. If we come to the auxiliary, we have two types of auxiliaries. The first type is what we call the, say, primary, and the second one is what we call the, say, model. The primary means the primary auxiliary, and the second one is the model auxiliary. In turn, the primary can be divided into either have, or do, or be. And if we come to the model in turns can be divided into two or three categories. That is main model and, say, marginal models. And sometimes we have another classification according to the structure. If we come, this is according to the first criterion, المعيار الأول, according to the function. While according to the form, verbs can be divided into either, say, finite verbs or, say, non-finite, say, or infinite. Sometimes we call it, it's better say infinite. Finite and infinite or non-finite verbs. This relates to the structure of the verb, as we are going to take in the next sections. This is in brief concerning the verbs in the section number 3. If we come to section 2, that is about the verb phrase or phrasal verbs. In this section, we have to take what we call the conjugation of the verb. Each verb, and all verbs in English, have 5 forms. These forms, as we know, the first one we call it the base. The second form we call it the S form. And the third form is the ing form. The fourth form is what we call the past, represented by ed. And the final one is the past participle, which is ed again. But to differentiate ed1 and to differentiate the past from the past participle, sometimes we call the first ed1, and we call the second ed2. Let's take an example of this form and see what is meant by this. Sometimes the base, or some linguists call it the root or the stem. For example, here we take two samples or examples to clarify this fact. Let's take, for example, the verb, let's say, ask. And the second verb, we take it, for example, speak. So the S form for the ask is what we call the asks. So we add just add S. And for speak, again, we add what? We add S. This is what we call S of the third person singular. If we take, we come to the ing form, we add just ask, we add just ing, and here again we add ing. So after speak. Of course, as you see, the process is very easy here. Does not need any effort. Just we add some extra letters. The problem seems or starts with here. If such a group of verbs like ask, help, etc., we add, for the past, we add ed. This is what we call. But the problem with the speak, as we know, it does not, or we do not add what ed, we have to change into spoke. So here the difference. And finally, for the ed, or the what we call the past participle, in case of ask, again, we add just ed, like this one, see? While in case of speak, we say spoken. See, here, the difference is why? Because this verb, ask, relate to verbs, is what we call what? We call them regular verb. We call them regular verb. Means regular verbs, verbs that take ed in the past and ed in the past participle. The second group, we call them the irregular group of verbs. What does it mean? Verbs that do not take ed and ed in the past participle, but we have some change in the verb. This change, of course, we have many changes, sometimes in the middle of the verb, at the end of the verb, the change in the consonants, sometimes the change in the vowel. We'll take these changes in a separate separate section. This is again how to divide. So of course, since we say regular verbs means the majority of the verbs of this category, while the lesser group or the minority of English verb of the second one, I mean of like a drink, say drinks, drinking, drank, drunk, or for example write, writes, writing, wrote, written, etc. So this is how do we divide the verbs and the according whether the verbs are regular or irregular. Again, this is in a brief. I think we talked about in the previous lectures about this classification, so no harm to repeat the same ideas again. Now we come to this section. I mean, when do we use this case? When do we use this one? When do we use this, etc.? Here we have some rules or cases in which we use each one. So let's take, let's explain when do we use each one. If we come to the first one, which is, we call it what? We call it the base or the model, the base or the root. We have cases in which this is the base. I mean, when do we use the base? We have, okay, cut.